Sure, I've made more than $10 million to date on Airbnb, but I'm telling you in this video why I might get out of the arbitrage model and why Airbnb arbitrage might be dead moving through 2021. Same location in Austin, Texas, that my first viral video on how I made all this money. I'm also now shooting you a video about how it could end. Sean Rocky Geach, Airbnb host for 7 years. Let's jump in. Hey guys, thanks for tuning in. Remember, like the video, please. Welcome aboard. Now, if you're new to this channel, odd time to step in, but welcome. And so I need to explain to you first what rental arbitrage is, which is essentially that you're gaining control of a property through a lease. So you don't own the property, right? You get a landlord to give you permission to do Airbnb. You furnish it and you put it on Airbnb or anywhere else. Now, this has always made money because Airbnb is hospitality. It's not real estate. So the amount of money you can get per night on a rental is much, much higher than you would typically pay in rent. And that's why rental arbitrage has been so cool. And the reason why I've always sold this thing for years and years is that, you know, with the 110 plus properties that I have, I've not ever had to put a down payment for a mortgage. And that's allowed me to grow really, really fast. With the amount of properties that I have, you know, I'd have to put 20 or 25% down per property, which is a lot of cash. So that's why I've always been singing the tune rental arbitrage. But there are a few things that are really putting the rental arbitrage model at risk on the chopping block, and where we might pull out of some markets altogether, for example. So the first one is regulations, and I have a portfolio in Philadelphia, as many of you know. And April 1st, 2022, regulations are going to be changing, which changes the zoning, which you can do Airbnb. You have to, of course, go through extra layers of screening, registration, permitting, stuff like that. And then the buildings have to meet some form of code additionally. And Philadelphia, there's a lot of old buildings, so there's probably a lot that are going to be out of code. Now, big companies like Sonder were totally cool with this. They didn't battle it because essentially they're de facto hotels. So even though they do arbitrage, they take entire buildings and do hotel conversions. So some of the biggest players in the Airbnb game are totally cool with this regulation because it's not going to affect them. And to be honest, a lot of my buildings still meet the code and the zoning that the regulations are going to change too. But there are a lot of hosts in Philadelphia that are going to get wiped off the map because they can't get grandfathered in to to Airbnb, even though they've been doing, say, like 6 to 8 years. They're going to be out of the zones that they're allowed to, and they won't get any love from the city, and they'll just get shut down. If you do rental arbitrage, this is what the danger is if an urban area decides to change their regulations and you have a 2-year-long or 3-year-long lease, you'll need to break those leases mid-lease because you're just going to be like in violation, and they could like sue you or fine you $1,000 a day or something crazy. So we do have a couple properties that we will lose the ability to Airbnb in Philadelphia. Not many of our properties, but a couple, and that still matters. So we're still going to take that to the face when it happens. Now, the other reason why we would pull out of Philadelphia specifically altogether is the landlord side of the issue. When you do rental arbitrage, like I said, you're getting control from a landlord, which means you have a person you kind of like you're responsible to and you're attached to. And some landlords are just shady, and some landlords don't do what they're supposed to do on their side of the deal. For example, if you rent an apartment and you live there, there are maintenance things that need to get done, and a lot of times the lease says that the landlord's responsible for maintenance, and they will go do the maintenance, you'll call them, and they'll fix things. Now, almost all leases then also restrict you from doing your own maintenance because the landlord is going to fix it themselves. And so this creates a really weird relationship in rental arbitrage where if you need something fixed, you need something fixed now because you have a guest coming or a guest current, and because you're in hospitality, they have a different level of care that they get than being a tenant. If you pay, for a cheap place, landlord's going to get around to fixing the toilet when he gets around to fixing the toilet, right? Well, in hospitality, it doesn't matter if the place is a cheap hotel room, you need to provide everything in great working condition. So if you have a landlord that doesn't fix stuff, you can go 7-10 days without having something fixed, and your hands are tied because you're not allowed to do the repairs, and then you get a bunch of cancellations or bad reviews. And in our history, we've worked with some landlords that just don't do their side of the deal, which really sucks. If we can't get this part fixed and we have trashy landlords that don't fix things in Philadelphia, then we will just stop doing Airbnb in Philadelphia if we can't find good landlords. What we're trying to do now too is changing our master lease agreements or lease addendums to include that we have the right to do repairs and then deduct that from rent. But then we have to, on the other side of the fence, we have to find a way to promise that we're not spending too much money on the maintenance side, because the landlord's not going to give us full trust to do repairs and then just deduct them a bunch of money, right? They obviously won't trust that we're going to be honest about it. So we need to find a way to make this work, and we don't have a solution yet on that repair deduct agreement. But this is something that we're pushing into to try to prevent us from having to shut down, with B-class properties or landlords that don't do their work. Now, in addition, Philadelphia specifically, landlords are also really shady. I've had landlords commit mortgage fraud, where they were constructing a new build out, gave us a third of the building, even though they're like capped at 10% corporate leases, and then tried to use our leases to get a refinance on their construction loan. But of course, mid leases, their tenants find out that there's Airbnb in the building, and they're going to whistleblow on the mortgage company, so they kick us out of the building before they could get caught for committing mortgage fraud on a big level. And that damaged us big time. They stole like 20 apartments worth of furniture, and we're in the middle of a lawsuit with them right now. That's no fun. In addition, there's another landlord that, because of regulations, got skittish and wants to shut down Airbnbs at all 10 of his high-rises, and so now we're negotiating our exit on buildings we basically just picked up and spent all this money on, which is, sad news. And then another landlord committed insurance fraud and tried to say that, they suffered like $200,000 in damage at properties due to us operating, where fun story for this one is they were Airbnb operators, wanted out of the game, leased the properties to us as is furnished, in a poor state of repair. We just took them over, and then we exited our leases because they weren't doing repairs, right? So 6 to 8 months later, we're out, and they're trying to now, they actually successfully told their insurer, State Farm, that there's $200,000 worth of damages, and now I am in litigation, essentially, with State Farm, saying, nope, we didn't cause that repair. It was like that when we picked it up. So, and this only happens in Philadelphia, apparently, the Northeast. I've never needed an attorney in Texas, but I have 3 of them that I've retained in Philadelphia because landlords are so wild and crazy. Now, I will say we did luck out on our Philadelphia deals because I always negotiate upfront concessions for free. So all of these deals, all of them, I got 8 weeks of rent for free on the front end or better, which means that, if the deal collapsed in 4 months or the deal collapsed in 8 months, I still got 2 months of rent for free, which is auto profit in my pocket. So we're not coming out of any of these deals at a loss because the only real investment was rents and the cost of furniture. And we actually got more in free rent concessions than we've ever paid in security deposits. But we just keep running into bad landlords in Philadelphia, which is a factor into whether or not we would stay doing rental arbitrage in Philly. And because of regulations, I don't really see us buying anything in Philadelphia ever, just because Philly's just really not that friendly. If I'm going to buy property, I'll do it in Texas, where I know I can, kind of get away with the model, and landlords are actually finding a value in our business. Because when you do arbitrage, if you're going to get a landlord to say yes and stick with you and give you the deal you want, they need to see the value in your model. And there was a time in Philadelphia where landlords were scrambling for tenants, so we were able to gobble up a bunch of property, but they saw the need for us only when their units weren't full. The moment that we filled the building and they had occupancy, largely because of us, now all of a sudden they don't see our value, even though we're the ones writing their rent checks. So there's been a bunch of drama in Philadelphia. Now the third reason, now this is one big reason why arbitrage could just generally be dead right now, is because of rent prices. See, home prices have gone up, they've skyrocketed, which means, it's really hard to buy an Airbnb property and make a good amount of money on it, because a home that was $400,000 is $500,000 or $600,000 now. And if you're buying these investment properties, that means you're putting way more cash out there and your mortgages are way higher. But that doesn't mean that Airbnb rates are higher. It doesn't mean short-term rental market's paying you more money. You're just paying more money for the house, right? So that's a big deal. But that does then change the rental market. And so we're finding that properties, let's say you're going to rent a house, if you're going to rent it for $3,000, you'd then be renting it for, say, $4,000 instead. And that increased rent without extra revenue means that you have less margin and you have higher carrying costs. And so the dangerous part of rental arbitrage is that you are 100% responsible for paying the rent regardless if you make enough money. And if our rents on average are $1,500 a month and we're making our revenue and then something goes wrong, well, our biggest risk of loss is $1,500 plus the utilities. But if now rent is $2,500 a month on average, then our risk of loss is $2,500 a month plus utilities. We can lose a lot more money per month if we don't make any money. So the risk of ruin here is much greater as the rental market increases. So what's really wild is it actually just makes it harder to Airbnb as a whole, right? Because buying a property is more expensive and renting a property is more expensive. But now the question is Airbnb making more money? I can smile and say this, yes, actually, thank God it is making more money. 2021, people have made more money than they've ever made on the Airbnb platform, which is nice. So if that pulls back though, right? If Airbnb travel drops and prices are still high, but people get what they call travel fatigue and stop traveling, then so Airbnb prices could get suppressed. So, and that is a risk there too. So what we're going to do about it is we're basically much more cautious on which properties we're taking. I've got $1.2 million in cash right now that I'm willing to put into some deals, but I'm not going to put it into deals until I get the right deals, because a lot of the mistakes that I've made is getting into the wrong deals. And I've obviously made a lot of mistakes in this game, guys, because, you know, obviously I'm the one here making the YouTube videos on how to do this. There's no one to teach me, so I get the distinct pleasure of bumping into things. And, you know, and it's still all my own fault. Like, you know, whether or not I negotiated good terms with the landlord, whether or not I saw that there was a term in the lease that was not in favor for us, whether or not I got into a deal with a landlord who was kind of like a shady guy and I didn't see that coming, that's all my fault. But thankfully I get to show you guys that. So we are still picking up currently. We are still picking up rental arbitrage deals. I've got a guy that I pay salary from Stay Alfred. So Stay Alfred, the company that went out of business during COVID, he works with me now, and he's like head of real estate acquisition. And then Haley, of course, runs the whole business. So that's, you know, how that's going, and I'm just a cash now. I'm putting the cash into the deals. Now, there could be a time where I actually do stop doing rental arbitrage deals because these factors all come into play and they hit the markets that matter most to me. And if that happens, I'll keep you updated. And what I want you to know, the reason why I'm telling you this is every industry has a risk. Every business has a risk. There are pros and cons to almost everything, and there's definite cons to rental arbitrage. We need margin in order to operate well. And so this is the part where, like, even if Airbnb is a good investment, arbitrage could become the not good investment. And the point here is like, let's say your mortgage on a house is $2,000, and with utilities, cleaning costs and stuff, your total carrying costs are, like, say $2,800 or something like that. And you revenue $3,300 on Airbnb. Well, you made $500 above your carrying costs, and you still made the money in your mortgage, the debt paydown. Now, if I rented that property for $2,200, my carrying cost would be $3,000. And if we like only revenued $3,300 on that, I made $300 and that's it. I got no debt pay down. My costs were higher because the landlord was charging me more money because he wants to get cash flow above his mortgage. In that world where my carrying costs are so high and revenues are so suppressed that my margin is low, I now am just grossly underperforming. Where that landlord who made $500 plus his debt pay down, he might have made like $1,200 including his debt pay down on the property, where I only made $300. So him buying the property and spending more money to get in, it's justified because we're in a low margin environment. And so that is what we could be at risk of getting into. If travel suppresses, there's still a lot of supply, prices for properties are high. We could end up in a world where my properties are not making enough margin to justify the absence of a mortgage, right? As long as Airbnb revenues are high enough that we can say make 25%, 30%, 35% on our money, which is roughly the case. We make about 27%, 30% on our money right now. As long as we get enough margin on our rentals to be able to get that much money back out of our deals, we can still do it. But if the moment that our rents are $100,000 and we only profit $10,000 a month at the end of it all, that's not good enough to do arbitrage. And at that point, you should just be buying your properties, because it's probably still better than being a landlord, but now arbitrage no longer outperforms. So there is a world where arbitrage does not win. We're not there yet, but we see the challenges. We see the risks. And in some markets, this might come sooner than others. So stay tuned. If something falls through the floor, you'll hear it from me. I'll probably complain, because I'm not above complaining. Thank you so much for watching this video, guys. If you have any questions, leave it in the comments. Happy to help as always. And as always, I'll see you on the other side.